My name is Nora Gelprin. I'm the Director of Sexuality Education and Training at Advocates for Youth. I'd like to welcome you to our tutorial called Creating LGBTQ Inclusive Classrooms. Advocates for Youth is a national nonprofit. We've been around for about 30 years. We're dedicated to youth sexual health and rights, and you may find this section of our website helpful if you're looking for more information. So, why sexual orientation? Let's look a little bit at some definitions as well as some data. So, one definition for sexual orientation that I find helpful is this one. Sexual orientation is the gender or genders of people to whom we are attracted romantically and sexually. A person can't control which people produce these feelings of attraction, meaning romantic and sexual feelings of attraction. I can't control who gives me butterflies in my stomach or makes my palms sweaty, but I do have choices around the behaviors I choose to engage in or not. So hopefully that's a helpful definition as we get started. Let's look a little bit at the data. GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, conducts a survey every other year. Here is a snapshot of data from their 2015 National School Climate Survey, a survey done with thousands of young people in middle and high schools across the country. We know that more than half of these students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning felt unsafe at school. Simply going to school felt unsafe to them. More than 70% personally had experienced verbal harassment based on their sexual orientation. And we know that of these students who've experienced this harassment, they are more likely to skip school, have a lower GPA, and have lower self esteem when compared to their heterosexual peers. We also know this alarming data came out over the summer. Despite our best efforts and hopes that we were making progress, still more than half of young people who identify as lesbian, gay, and bisexual reported feeling so sad or hopeless that they stopped doing some of their typical activities. 40% had considered suicide, and a full third had tried suicide. So these statistics are incredibly alarming and concerning, and they tell us we need to be doing more. So I'd like to offer 5 quick strategies for creating inclusive classrooms. I hope you'll find them useful. I'll review them all first, and then I'll go through them one by one in greater detail. They are using inclusive language, confronting every instance of bias, providing effective redirect when you hear bias, not assuming all students or their families are heterosexual, and lastly, not assuming that being lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, or asexual is a problem, quote unquote. So let's look at these a little bit further. Using inclusive language is a really simple thing that everyone can do. It just includes small changes to your language to be more thoughtful about creating an inclusive environment for all your students. These can include these kinds of words or phrases, gender neutral names, using the word partner, using someone who is gay or lesbian, remembering the diversity of families when you're talking about families, as well as removing the assumption that every time 2 people are sexual, there could be a risk for pregnancy. We call that heterosexism, and we know not everyone identifies as heterosexual. So that can be really helpful as an easy starting point using inclusive language. Second is to make sure you confront every instance of bias, and I'd like to share with you a very simple 3 step technique that can help you do that. The first is to talk with the student who's conducting the biased language or behavior. Tell them to stop it by saying things like, that language is unacceptable. What you said is hurtful. You want to stop it right away. The next step is to name what you're noticing or what you're observing. When you say, that's so gay, you are offending people. Something as clear and concise as that can be all you need. And lastly, to claim it, to provide a little bit of explanation or rationale for why you find that offensive. That language is not acceptable in my classroom, so please don't say it again. So 3 quick and easy steps where you can easily confront every instance of bias by using stop it, name it, claim it as a really effective technique. Next is to provide an effective redirect when you hear bias. I'll give you some examples from the GLSEN Think Before You Speak campaign. This wonderful campaign they have with all kinds of educational resources and PSAs. Saying things like, it's not okay to use someone's identity as a put down, very simple and to the point. I know you didn't mean to, but saying that's so gay is really offensive, so please don't use it again. Lastly, please don't equate being gay with being stupid. It's not acceptable in my classroom. You get to decide the climate in your classroom, and making sure when you hear something biased that you effectively redirect that person can be a really effective technique. Next is to not assume your students and their family are all heterosexual. Oftentimes, this comes up when we talk about moms and dads, or we assume that there is all heterosexual families in our students and their backgrounds. So this is from a group called Collage: Children of Lesbian and Gays Everywhere. I'd like you to just read what Erin has to say. I think it's really important and powerful, and we want to make sure that we don't make assumptions about families of our students so that we make them feel invisible, or worse, we shame or stigmatize them. Lastly, to not assume that being a young person who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, or asexual is quote unquote a problem. Oftentimes, we only focus on the negative statistics, which, while alarming, are certainly cause for more concern. We also acknowledge that it's not all young people who identify this way that are finding struggling with issues around bias or depression or low self esteem. We know that there are plenty of examples of healthy, vibrant people in our community of all racial, ethnic categories, of all socioeconomic statuses, of all abilities, all across the country and around the world that are leading healthy, productive, loving, happy lives. And we want to make sure to acknowledge that with our young people as well. So, just to review, the five strategies include using inclusive languages, confronting every instance of bias by providing an effective redirect when you hear that bias, not assuming all your students or their families are heterosexual, and not assuming all young people who identify as LGBTQA are a problem. So, I hope you'll find these helpful for you in your work, and thanks so much for participating in this tutorial.